Superintendent, the president of the Alberta Somali Community Association says that police are treating Somalis like second-class citizens, his words, in their investigations of crimes within that community. Is that valid?
I don't think it's valid. What I would like to say is that the Edmonton Police Service subscribes to the notion that all communities have value. And I think the City of Edmonton truly subscribes to that. In fact, it's part of their policy, if you will. We believe in a diverse community that is inclusive of all communities. And while he's certainly entitled to his opinion, I can state wholeheartedly that any time such a tragic event as a homicide impacts any family, all life is valued, and certainly by the Edmonton Police Service, we will exhaust every lawful and ethical manner in which we can proceed in an investigation, and regardless of who the person, we don't get to choose our victims, if I may say, and so to that end, our service is dedicated to solving the cases as best we can and exhausting every investigative lead that there is.
And that maybe is the trouble, because there hasn't been a great track record of solving the Somali murders in particular, and I think that's frustrating for everybody.
Sure.
As Somali community leaders, and I realize you represent the Canadian organization,
yes.
Here in Edmonton and in Alberta, leaders have said police are just not putting enough resources into the crimes. Is it as simple as that?
I think that's a legitimate point, and they got that information not out of their own research, but out of the comments of former police chief Mike Boyd. He went in front of the police commission in Edmonton, and they asked him, why is Edmonton having a low percentage of clearance for homicides? And his response was, we need more money, not just for the police, but more money to be dedicated towards homicide detectives.
All homicides?
Yes, all homicides. It's not just the homicides in our community. So what they're really saying is something that has been said by former Chief Mike Boyd.
We've also heard, though, one homicide investigator complain that there wasn't enough coming forward from the community, that there wasn't enough community help, voicing his frustration. It was in January, and he expressed frustration when a young Somali man was killed, another wounded in a crowded restaurant, and out of all the people there, only one person spoke to him and gave him a description of the gunman. Somali leaders outraged by some of the comments that followed there, specifically may as well move on to other murders if the community isn't going to help. Aside from the choice of words there, can you talk about that particular frustration in these series of murders, if not that one?
Well, what I'd like to do is talk about our successes, because I think they set an example of what we can do.
Yes.
And regardless of community in terms of culture or ethnic background, they're Edmontonians. These are Canadians. And I would offer that in 2009, in the Mohammed Khalif homicide, we had two individuals, very courageous, from within the community, come forward and give evidence and testified in court. And it's individuals that have the courage to come forward, and when they have meaningful information that can assist in the investigation of a case, these two individuals, like many other people from community who have come forward in past homicides, but in particular within this community as an example, that case was solved, and there were two individuals convicted in court as a result of that. And that speaks to the courage and the respect for human life, that these two individuals came forward and said, this is unacceptable in Canadian society, and
Ahmed,
they stood up.
Is that happening enough within the Somali community?
Well, actually, Detective Clark needed, one of the reasons why there was a reaction to his comments was that we felt he needed to update himself. His comments were accurate 3 years ago. They do not correspond to the reality now. In fact, his own fellow officers have been on record, more senior officers have been on record as saying that not only has the level of cooperation between the Canadian Somali community in Alberta and Edmonton, not only has it increased, it's actually surpassed other communities.
Is that because of work you've tried to do?
Absolutely. Work that we've tried to do with Crime Stoppers, with EPS and other agencies working with us, because we have knowledge of the community, going into the community and having workshops with respect to how Crime Stoppers works and how do you guarantee anonymity and that type of thing. So
to get over fear and
so
mistrust.
The frustration wasn't with Detective Clark per se, it was with the fact that his comments were really out of date.
Okay. Chris, what do you see here?
Yeah, I think implementation of programs at the grassroots is a good thing, about cultural sensitivity training, about hiring more officers with ethnic backgrounds, so on and so forth. These are all really good things. And what we're talking about here, about bolstering numbers and adding more money to the police service, and I'm not going to argue against that, but I think to really solve a problem, I mean, homicide units in police services are almost 100%, if not 100% reactionary. They're not actually going to necessarily prevent all of the homicides, or any for that matter. And I think what we need to look at a little bit more deeply is the political and social and economic underpinnings or inequalities that exist in our society. Because, and I'm not suggesting to you that a 16-year-old ethnic boy runs through his head that, oh, I feel an injustice, so I'm going to go and kill someone. Not at all. But these injustices lead to things like alcoholism and drug abuse and gang affiliation and dropout from school. And all of these are highly correlated to delinquency, to future criminality, including homicide.
The Somali community in Alberta, Canadian Somalis, have asked the Alberta government to form a provincial task force. The Justice Minister has refused at this point, saying it would be too expensive, it would take too much time. What happens is you need to get to the root of the problem, is what she has said. Okay. Is it the drug trade? Is it social inequality? We want to come back and talk about the root causes in a moment, and we want to ask, what do you think needs to happen to curb the high rate of homicides within the Canadian Somali community? Share your thoughts by following the contact links at albertaprimetime.com, and we're back with our panel in 60 seconds.
I think the police do a fantastic job, and I think community members in every different ethnic background have to help out the police force.
I'm not sure if it's just the Somali community. I think that they're the ones that maybe are in the news latest, but there's violence all over the city.
I never really got the impression that there was a whole lot of local policing going on in the streets for any kind of community, whether it was Somali or not.
I have a bunch of friends that do live in that community, and they say nothing happens. Like, they just don't, there's no police presence at all.
Some thoughts there from Albertans on the impact law enforcement may or may not be having on violence within the Somali community. A series of tragic murders of young men in Alberta over the last 6 years, nearly 40. Danielle, is there a common thread here? Is it the drug trade? Is it something else? What is the root cause?
Well, honestly, that's a great discussion for social scientists, but we can look at certain trends. For example, we can look at addiction rates. We can look at alcohol, access to edged weapons and firearms. We can look to the mode in terms of a planned event or an unplanned reactionary event.
What do you see in these murders?
There's no discernible difference. We have, within the Edmonton Police Service, we have over 150 unsolved homicides dating back to 1938. Of those, 12 happen to be representative of the Somali community. Through our lens, any community is all-encompassing. It's the City of Edmonton that we police, that we serve, and all communities have value.
What do you see as some of the problems that you're trying to address as community leaders?
First of all, we're fighting two battles. We're fighting the internal battle of trying to get the community moving forward on some of the issues that you talked about, working with the police and dealing with these issues. We've had an amazing amount of success in that aspect. But we find that we're fighting a bigger battle, the battle with the mainstream, that we always constantly have to remind them that these are Canadians who are dying. They're a product of this society. And the reaction we get, for the most part, is the mainstream is still not there. So, for example, we will go to a meeting as representatives of the community to meet with the police chief or the head of the school board.
Do you feel like it's something in your community, fix it? Is that what you feel?
That's part of it, but also the idea is no one will look at the solutions we're bringing forth. They'll get busy trying to micromanage us and say, and treat us with lower standards. So, and sometimes it's very well-meaning. So they'll use racism of lower expectations to say, instead of talking about the subject, we become the subject. And that wastes our time and it wastes their time.
Chris?
I think what's fair, or what we need to say, is that often what we do is crime is a community problem, not a policing one. Right. And what I mean by that is we often dump a lot onto the police services. We dump not only disorder and crime, but we dump all of our social ills and say, fix it. And that's not fair because they're not equipped. Secondly, it's not part of their mandate. There's something, though, in the research that's called a contact hypothesis, and I think that's what you might be referring to. And it's a contact hypothesis essentially says that the more contact you have as two subgroups or groups, the better the relationship you will develop out of that. However, there has to be a few things present, and one is both groups have to have equal status. Right. I'm not sure if we do. Both groups have to have common goals. Well, one goal can't be solve homicide. We can't, that's not a goal. That's too out there. That's too large. We have to break it down to subcomponent parts. And then the third component is we have to have social norms that help us to participate together. And I think what we often do in society is we know this contact hypothesis, either through the research or through just what we know. And we think if we have a few meetings together, that'll work. But we have a miscommunication here, and we don't have those three components of the theory, and we need that to be able to move forward, I think.
If I may add, very good points. We need to stop working in silos. That's right. Relationships need to be developed, and trust is earned. We need to understand so much as Canadians in terms of to any country that when people immigrate to Canada, they bring with them the rules and their cultural experiences from their home country. But now they live in Canada, and as Canadians, we acknowledge that this country values diversity. And it's a great country. To that end, we must understand each other to work together. And so relationships...
Yes, but the problem is, the police are saying, let's work together, and we have been ahead of that. We do want to work together. But the problem is, instead of the police dealing with the really innovative and very common objectives and solutions that we bring forward, instead of dealing with those issues, and we might even disagree with some of the solutions that we bring forward, but some of them are in your best interest. For example, when we call for more resources for homicide detectives, instead of accepting that and saying, wow, this is a community that is willing to be our allies, they're busy micromanaging us and saying, well, you should have one Somali group. Why are you having 3 Somali groups? Instead of dealing with the issue, we should have the same we should be given the same benefit of the doubt to have diversity. They would never do that to the Ukrainian community in Edmonton. And that's part of what I'm talking about. Also, no one is talking about integration. People are talking about diversity, but it's a diversity of people sitting around the table. No one is talking about diversity where it matters. We have 14,000 Canadians of Somali origin in Edmonton, and since 2005, the Edmonton Police Service has not been able to recruit one officer, one. And there's no way I can believe that, as much good faith as I have with the Edmonton Police Service, which I do, I cannot understand how they were not able to do that. And that was a commitment that they made.
Danielle?
It's my understanding that within the Edmonton Police Service, we have a myriad of areas that work to engage youth. And so when we think about the bigger picture, it starts with youth. And so I'm happy to say that we have different units within the Edmonton Police Service that have made it their business to try and recruit and select people from all communities. And to that end, it's my understanding that we have Somalian representation in our cadet program.
So you're working on it?
Absolutely.
6 years. We've had 6 years. We got that promise in 2005. It's been 6 years. You're telling me that it takes 6 years to recruit one single officer from 14,000 people? That's the part. I'm very supportive of the police, but I think on the recruitment promise, the police service has not lived up to its promise, respectfully.
One other area, and this is just a little bit broader,
Sure,
that's been raised, is the resources. We've talked about that a little bit, to the point where Edmonton Councillor Amarjeet Sohi publicly gave a bit of a listing that since 2007, the city has given more than $145,000 in grants to 17 organizations that help the Somali community. Last spring, Alberta gave a $200,000 grant to reduce and prevent crime in the Canadian Somali community. In December, the federal government launched the Somali Youth Skills Project to help youth find employment. Is it that some resources are there, but they're either not enough or not doing the right things, as you alluded to?
Number one, the resources are not enough for the scale of the problem. And that's the lower standards that I'm talking about. If it was any other community, the resources would be 10 times what you talked about. Secondly, we have to adapt to the standards through another mainstream organization. The government says, the city government specifically says, we'll give you money, but you have to sort of go through the Boys and Girls Club.
But didn't you just say mainstream is the way to go?
Well, yes, but for us, on our own terms. And there's nothing that the Boys and Girls Club can tell me about our Boys and Girls Club. I know better, and I have more intelligence. So I should be mainstream.
You have more intelligence?
On the Boys and Girls Club, on the boys and girls in our community, right? So that's one. The second point is the province has finally come around. The province is the only government entity in this province that has treated us as Canadians. So they have given us resources exclusively for projects that are indigenous from our own community. The city hasn't done that. And that's the lack of leadership that I'm talking about. The police are halfway there, they've worked with us, but they're getting the wrong political signal from the city.
Any comments from either of you to that before we wrap up?
Chris, would you? My comment is this. We can ill afford to work in silos, and I would offer that by keeping separate and different, Somalian Boys and Girls Club separate from the Edmonton Boys and Girls Club, is supporting that silo mentality. And so I'm encouraged by what the Edmonton Police Service has done in terms of the African Community Liaison Committee and the great work that's being done by Superintendent Brad Ward with your community. Certainly, Chiefs Committee is live to any initiatives, whether it be recruiting and selection, crime prevention. We have so many issues that are the root causes of crime in general.
From the point
homelessness
about the Boys and Girls Club I was making was, I don't have a problem for the government to give Boys and Girls Club resources to help our community. But if they have no clue about what's happening in the community and they use the resources in the wrong way, then I'd rather the resources come to our community. That was the point I was
Chris, a lot of animosity here, a lot of passion, a lot of frustration. It's difficult.
It's good. I think
Work it out.
I think it's healthy. Yeah, I think it's very good. I don't know, to summarize, I'm not going to comment. I'm proud of the governments at multi levels that recognizing the problem. I too would say that it's probably not enough done. I think one thing we really have to do is I'm not sure that a homicide problem or any type of crime problem can be solved, in a week, in a month, in a year. And I think what we have to do is we have to look at some long-term, proactive long-term strategies, including, I'll give you one example. We know that FAS is a huge correlation between FAS and later delinquency.
Fetal alcohol syndrome.
Yeah, 15 years later. Okay. Well, why don't we deal with the problem before it becomes a real problem 15 years later?
Good insight from all of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Ahmed Hussain is president of the Canadian Somali Congress and speaking on behalf of the Alberta Somali Community Centre as well tonight. Danielle Campbell, superintendent of criminal investigations with the Edmonton Police Service, and Chris Hay, a criminologist and executive director of the John Howard Society.